everyone. We're back with Live with Love after a few weeks off. Great to see you, Julie.
Good to see you, Gretchen. You've been traveling a lot.
I've been traveling a lot, and actually right now I'm in my home state of Minnesota because on top of everything else, I'm moving my parents into a new place. And I lost my dad's credit card last night, just for everyone's information. So just to add more stress to the already existing move. Yeah. Anyway, don't use our Visa if you find it. So anyway, we have a big event coming up next week that we're really excited about. So a week from today, we hope that you will join us for Men as Allies, which is going to be our latest webinar. We have two fantastic guests. We have Michael Smerconish, who of course has his own radio show, and he's also does a CNN show on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. He's been very concerned about men in our society, and we're very concerned about bridging across the aisle to men to help us make workplaces safer. We also have Ted Bunch, who has founded and runs A Call to Men. He's been a partner with us before. I love his phrase. He says, being a real man is a man who stands up for women. And he's all about trying to teach young boys, to kind of break out of that masculinity, protector kind of, not that they're bad, but just that it kind of continues on our patriarchal society rather than having us all work together. So that's going to be Tuesday, October 21st, 12 p.m. Eastern. You guys can go to our website and sign up at aftervoices.org, or I believe we're going to put up a QR code too that will allow you to sign up, and we'll keep talking about it throughout. So Julie, why do we think it's so important that we have men as allies and men involved in our fight?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that you and I have always believed that this is not an either or situation, and that men need to be part of this conversation. Men need to help us and work with us, because men are partners in this whole thing, and we welcome them and we invite them in. You and I both have sons. You have a daughter as well, but we always say we're doing this for our boys just as much as we're doing this for our girls, because we want to raise a generation of men who are going to think about these issues in a really thoughtful way, and who are going to welcome women in. And as we always say, men still run the vast majority of companies in this country. And so we need to bring men into this discussion. I've always, kind of disliked this notion of, girl power versus male power. And the reality is we're all partners in this together, and we need to treat each other that way, and not as adversaries and not as competitors, but as people who are going to work together to make the workplace a much better place. And I'm so excited to have Michael Smerconish and Ted Bunch here, because they're both in some ways dedicated their lives to talking about these very issues. So it's just a huge thing for us next week to be able to talk to them about this.
Yeah, we hope you'll join us. I mean, I think one of the greatest lessons that I learned after I came forward at Fox, Julie, is that we need men. And on top of that, that there were tons of men out there who want to help us. Like, the majority of men are good eggs. In fact, in my own unscientific study, when I was walking the streets of New York City right after I came forward at Fox, more men than women would stop me to say thank you. They'd say thank you for my wife, for my daughters, for my granddaughters, for my nieces. And it made me realize, wow, we need to invite them into this conversation. And then to your point, they still run 95% of the corporate businesses in America. And so if we're just going to continue to speak in silos with each other, meaning women over here and men over here, we're never going to be able to bridge together to get men to understand the differences that women face. What do we face in the workplace that's different? What does an African-American person face in the workplace that's different? What does a person with a disability, or somebody who's experiencing age discrimination, or somebody who's gay, or somebody who's trans? Like, all of these things are really important to invite men into the conversation if they're running the company, so that they can have more empathy and understanding for people that are different from them inside their culture. That is the way that we make change. And that's the way that we increase transparency, instead of all just, going out and having men go on the golf course and women go to the spa. I mean, those are kind of age-old things that are not going to bring us together.
It's interesting that you say this. I, about 15 years ago, went up to Massachusetts with a male friend to meet two older couples for lunch and at their house. And the men went into one room and the women went into the other room. And the men talked about whatever the men talk about. And the women talked about kind of very traditional things that you might think women, I personally wasn't interested in hearing about yoga classes and other things, but I found it so interesting because I was thinking, why do we do this? Like, why do we segregate men and women even socially automatically, which of course leads to that kind of segregation at work. And we're putting people in buckets and we're assuming that just because I'm a woman, I'm interested in talking about whatever these women were talking about and not interested in whatever these men were talking about. And I probably was. And I have no idea what they were talking about, but I was curious. I'd like to know what they were saying. So I think it's cultural. It's almost endemic. I think it's changing. And I think we have to force open that door to make sure that we have integrated spaces where men and women can just talk about stuff without worrying about how it's going to be perceived and that they should not have women around because they might say something that's going to offend women. And next thing you know, they're going to be written up. Like, most men, as you say, are good eggs. And we want to be around them. We want to invite them in. We want them to be around us and in the workplace so that we can lift each other up.
A couple other observations when I was overseas in the last couple of weeks, and I think about this every time I go overseas, you see men congregating with each other, actually having coffees. And, I guess in America, like they go on the golf course. But I think one of the things that Michael Smerconish and Ted Bunch are going to talk about when we have our webinar next Tuesday, October 21st, 12 p.m. Eastern, please join us. I think one of the things they're going to talk about is that we don't congregate enough with men in America because there's whole machismo thing about, oh, well, we're not going to get together and talk about our feelings. I mean, there's a crisis in our country about men not having friends. And it's usually the women, for the most part, that are sort of bringing men into couple situations. But men, I think women have their girlfriends. Men don't socialize as much like that as I see overseas, where it's just common practice to get together for a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning. I saw in Vietnam, I saw them playing badminton together. I mean, whatever it is that brings them together, or doing Tai Chi. It has to be more than just the golf course in America. And so I think that's part of the crisis, is that men don't have other friends. They don't talk about their feelings. They don't, and so they depend on their relationships with women only for romance, if they're heterosexual. And I think that stunts their growth. Sorry, but I do think it's true to how they relate to women and to other people that are not like them as well. I think the more that you have friendships and can be open and talk about your feelings. So it's just an observation that I've made, and why I'm really excited for this conversation with both Michael and Ted.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point that you raised, because the golf course is pretty much the only place where they congregate. But listen, there's a barrier to entry to golf, and that's not everybody's cup of tea, even if you can afford it, which I think is something that, we have to bear in mind. I can't remember the last time that my husband, for instance, who has a lot of male friends, but we, as you said, we socialize in couples. There's never been a time where he said, oh, I'm going to take so-and-so to a hockey game. He's a hockey fan. Or do things like that. And I think in some ways, this is a horrible statistic, but this is why men don't live long when their wives die, because they don't have that kind of emotional support that they get from their wives. And whereas women, when their husbands die, have girlfriends with whom they can empathize, and it's okay to cry on their shoulder, and it's okay to express your feelings. And even before death, I mean, how many times have you had lunch or dinner with one of your friends, your women friends, and have talked about the stuff that's going on with your kids or your husband, or troubles you might have in your relationships? Men don't do that. And that translates to work. That kind of machismo, as you said, that kind of, I got to be tough, I've got to be strong, translates to work. And it's not good. It's not good for the emotional even capacity of the workplace where people should be able to talk about their feelings, and no surprise that when they try, they get shunted into arbitration or they have an NDA because we don't talk about bad stuff. We just don't. We just move on. We're tough. We're American. We just move on.
Yep.
And it leads to all sorts of bad consequences, not just for the person complaining, but also for the company, where eventually things blow. I mean, we know that from Fox, right? You can't walk around with something bad happening to you. Eventually somebody blows and takes everything down with them. You know, in the case of Fox, it was you. But this happens every single day in every single company that has that kind of culture, I think.
Yeah, so we're getting pretty deep here on what, but that's why I'm so excited. If you're just joining us, please join us next week, 12 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday, October 21st, Men as Allies, a webinar we're doing with Michael Smerconish, CNN and radio fame, and Ted Bunch, who runs A Call to Men. They have both been passionate about lifting men up in our society. I know sometimes, women's groups are like, why do we have to lift up men? There's a crisis in America right now with our young men with porn. There's a crisis in America with our young men in suicide. There's a crisis in America for what we've just been talking about men being able to express their emotions. The one glimmer of hope that I have, Julie, is that there it is. We're so excited about this webinar. So sign up and join us, register. It's free. And the other thing, though, that I have hope about, Julie, that I was going to add is that, when we travel across the country, we see that young men, more so than other age groups, are very into this idea of transparency and openness. And I was very surprised by that. I thought it was just going to be women in the workplace who were interested in fixing things. Younger men, especially, they're more socially conscious, I think, just as a generation, but they do want to work together with women. When I started going out on my book tour, this is, 8 years ago already now, I had just as many young men come to these events as young women. And that was another thing. I was like, wow, we really need to invite them into this conversation to help us.
There is a push right now to have young men revert to this whole, like, we're men and we're kind of rule the roost and we're the type A person and the wife has to submit. And when you get married, the woman has to. And I think that's a very dangerous mentality, not just for relations between men and women, but also for the workplace, because ultimately that pushes women out of the workplace. Ultimately, that prevents men from really lifting women up. On the other hand, and I'll use your son as an example because I think he's a great example of this. You have young men, your son's in his 20s, right? Who are incredibly emotionally attuned. I mean, I've known your son now for a long time, and I've kind of seen him grow up into this wonderful young man. I'm not just saying that because he's your son. I really mean that. And, there is a generation of women who I think are raising men consciously, young men consciously, to be more empathetic and to invite women in and to understand that if they get into positions of influence, that women need to be included, that women need to be lifted up. I'm certainly trying to raise my son that way. You have succeeded in doing that with yours, I think, in a very nice way. And it really is a counterforce to what you're seeing, because right now the narrative that you're seeing with young men is, oh, these are just women who kind of have to be put in their place, and the incel movement and all of that. And it's real and it's happening. And you see that in kind of the blogosphere, and you see that in the podcast sphere, and that's what's being lifted up. And I don't think we talk enough about what our seminar is going to be about, our webinar is going to be about, is that you're not, that we want to invite men in, that there's nothing to be afraid of, for people together and not worry about it. Great question. What's your biggest piece of advice when you say that you're a feminist but not against men? Being a feminist is not being against men. Being a feminist simply means that you think you should have as many rights as men. That's it. There's nothing more to it. And it's not important of men. It's not that we're trying to supplant men. It's not that we think we're better than men.
Oh, sorry, Em, I'm just seeing your message.
So
I don't know if it's your connection, Julie, or my connection, but it's maybe it's mine.
I think it's yours. But so I'll just keep talking until your connection resumes. But I would just say, I think people need to understand. Maybe Gretchen, you could leave and come back. Maybe that'll be better. But people need to understand that we're just trying to all work together. And if you're a confident man, and if you are secure in yourself, and if you are just a member of the human race, there is no reason on earth why you can't invite women in and treat them the way that you would want to be treated yourself. That's all. That's all being a feminist is. There's nothing more to it. I'm a proud feminist. I know that you are too, Gretchen. Because it's not about an either situation. So I know what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So let's if my connection is not great, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're a little fuzzy, but it's okay. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up, because I'm in the hinterlands of Minnesota, so who knows why my connection is doing whatever it's doing. But please join us next week. I think we can put up the graphic again. Men as Allies, our webinar. We're going to be talking to Ted Bunch, Michael Smerconish, about the crisis that men are facing, young men, but how we can all come together to make workplaces safer for every person who doesn't look like all the men running every company, so that we can be better informed, and how can we start bridging these gaps. We have to do this as a society. And thank you. I see a message from a lifelong feminist from Minnesota. Yay! That's where I am right now. So join us next week. Go on to our website to sign up. And we would love to see you next week, 12 p.m. Eastern, for this very, very, very important conversation. Julie, I'll see you back in New York.
Yeah, everybody. Bye, Gretchen. Safe flight back. Bye.
Thanks.